All right. So this is a little presentation that I whipped up. All right. So what is Bitcoin? Um, there's been a lot of news about Bitcoin in the recent days to weeks to months, really. And I think that there's a lot of good talk about it. There's a lot of excitement about it, but there's not that much understanding about it. So I figured that I would put together a little presentation to talk a little bit more about it and hopefully make it a little bit less confusing for people. So Bitcoin is a platform. Uh, Bitcoin is also a unit of value. And I think it's really important to keep these two separate, because when people are talking about a Bitcoin, they're talking about something that has, value compared to the US dollar. However, when people are talking about Bitcoins, a lot of times people are actually talking about cryptocurrencies, virtual currencies, as the IRS likes to call them. And it's an important thing to keep in mind, because at the end of the day, you may end up investing in Bitcoin, you may end up investing in Ethereum, you may end up investing in Litecoin, other virtual currencies, and it's an important distinguishing factor to make. So Bitcoin as a platform, and virtually all virtual currencies as a platform, are first and foremost a public record of transactions. So they're a record book. They allow for everybody to see how much money everybody has, and therefore it allows for people to kind of verify, oh, okay, you give me this much money, or I give you this much money. So a Bitcoin itself is the primary unit of value. You can actually divide up a Bitcoin into any fraction that you want, up to 8 decimal places. A Satoshi, and by the way, bold and underlined words are kind of common vocabulary words that you're going to see people use in news, on Reddit, on other community posts. So important ones to keep in mind. So a Satoshi is the smallest fraction of Bitcoin that you can actually make, and it's equivalent to this many Bitcoins. Like I said, 8 decimal places, 7 zeros and a 1. And that just is because of the way that the platform works, and how numbers are stored in a computer. Although in theory, you could imagine a situation where you could have less than this much Bitcoin. So the other thing to keep in mind is what virtual currencies use, and essentially every virtual currency uses something called a blockchain. Now that is a very hot topic word these days, and in order to kind of understand it, you have to kind of understand what exactly a block is. So, like I said, a virtual currency is a record book, right? Record books have pages. So on each page, you're going to have a line or a transaction, and it's going to make up a page. And a page, I think, is very analogous to a block, because every time you put a new page in the record book, you're essentially putting a new block in the page. And you can imagine where it's a chain, because this block came before the page before it, or the block before it. The way that Bitcoin works, in terms of the platform itself, is that every 10 minutes there's a new page of the record book, and that page has transactions on it. So owning Bitcoin is, I think if 50 years ago, obviously we didn't have computers and internet the same way that we do today, but we lived in a society where cash was still kind of king, right? However, nowadays, I don't know about you guys, but I basically pay for everything with credit cards. I very rarely have any money on me, and I carry very minimal amounts of cash in my wallet. It's all kind of a number in my bank account and a number on my credit card statement. So it's actually not that different than what we're used to. You know, we already live in sort of a cashless society. Bitcoin can transfer from one person that has it to another person that has it very easily. All you have to do is know it. All you have to need, all that you need to have is their public address, and you send from one public address to another public address. One thing to consider though is that there is a fee with every transfer. So you know, it's something to keep in mind. But transferring small amounts of Bitcoin actually is it's not very economically feasible, right? You can see right here, these are the current fees. I actually just took this from December 1st or something like that, so these should be up to date. You can pay, in terms of the fees that you pay, you can pay less of a fee. However, there is a minimum amount that you do want to pay in order for the transaction to actually work. And you can see here typically the 6 block fee. And remember, like we said, a block is just a page in the ledger. So getting your transaction put into the next 6 blocks right now costs about $1.68. Versus if you want your transaction to occur in the next block, it would be closer to $4. So almost, you know, 3 to 4 times as much to have it processed, 6 times faster. And keep in mind, these fees will change. They've actively changed, and it depends on the network. It depends on how many transactions are being processed simultaneously. Depends on a lot of things. So, yeah. So to get back to a more abstract, taking a step back, you know, with currencies, you have two main, or at least now we have 2 main types, right? So you have a centralized currency, typically issued by a mint in the U.S. You know, there's the USA has its own currency. The European Union has its own currency. You know, different countries have their own currency, and in those situations, we trust the central party. So we trust America. We trust you know, the European Union, and even to get further into that, we further centralize it by having these large banks, Bank of America, Chase Bank, you know, all these big banking corporations where we store our money, and we trust them to not only hold them but to verify. You know, if I want to transfer, you know, some amount of money to my landlord or some amount of money to, you know, a restaurant, they'll kind of handle that. Not only that, so we have, like I said, at least in the US here, we have the US, we have banks, we have credit card companies, CC for credit card companies. And then we also have something that's really nice, at least to further consolidate our trust, called the FDIC, which to simplify things, it's a way for you to store money in your bank. And if that bank were to go bankrupt, it would ensure, the U.S. government would ensure that you wouldn't just lose your money up to $500,000. So, you know, we put a lot of trust into this system, and there's a lot of things that actually protect the users of the system, like the FDIC. Also, you know, think of a situation where you've had your, you know, credit card skimmed. Your bank calls you and says, like, this doesn't look right. You know, are you sure that this is you? And you say, oh no, that's somebody that stole my card. They'll immediately not only cancel the transactions, but they'll also refund you, which is something that's fantastic, and it protects the people that own money, right? Like you and me. So on the other hand, you have the decentralized currency, and this is what virtual currencies are. This is what Bitcoin is. There's a few levels of trust here. And, you know, unfortunately, for better or for worse, the math and the security behind cryptographic hashing is what it's called is actually really well understood. However, it is not something that you or I will understand in our future. at least beyond the most superficial way of understanding it. However, there is a lot of math behind this, and it is a secure platform. So the platform, at least right now, the platform itself is secure, right? So now you just have to have the security of the users, and I think that this is really, really important point, especially if you're new to virtual currencies, if you're new to this idea of decentralized currencies, right? Because, it's easy for us to say we trust the US. It's easy to say we trust the banks, right? For some people, it will be easy to say, yes, I trust this platform. And I have another video talking about exactly why you should trust that platform. That's much more in depth and much longer. But this is honestly the problem, I think, for a lot of people that they don't necessarily realize. You have to trust yourself with your money. When you have Bitcoin, you have your own personal wallet, and if your wallet gets stolen, you lose your Bitcoin. If you lose the key to your wallet, then you lose your Bitcoin. If, like I said, if somebody steals it, there's nobody that's gonna step in and say, "Oh yeah, that was fraud. You actually own this money, and we'll stop this from happening." That's not how this works. You have to understand not only how to store it, but the consequences of every transaction, the consequences of your transaction fees, and all of this. So I really urge people to kind of take a step back and make sure that they not only understand, at least on a superficial level, the security of the platform, so that they themselves can understand what it means to securely store your own Bitcoin. Okay. All right. So now we start getting into things that make people actually excited. So value, right? How much is it worth? One Bitcoin right now is actually, at least the last time I checked last night, was up to $11,172 US. So obviously, Bitcoin has taken off like crazy in the past 3 to 6 months, I'd say. It went from essentially $1,000 to $11,000. So increased by over 11-fold in really just a few months. And it's really amazing because it really is showing a lot of signs of continuing to grow. And I'm sure there will be some dips here and there, but at least in the short term, it seems like to be moving up very rapidly. And it's an important time to kind of start to understand all this. So Coinbase.com I put in because I think it's probably the number one Bitcoin exchange in North America, at least, or at least the easiest to deal with. Basically, an exchange is sort of like eBay for Bitcoin. You pay a certain amount of dollars. The exchange interfaces with your bank to withdraw money or with a credit card company. The exchange takes a small fee, which is probably a percentile. I don't think that it's a fixed fee. I think it is a percentile. And then they hook you up with somebody who has Bitcoin and exchanges it with you and exchanges it to your personal wallet. I've put in Fiat here. This is you'll see this term thrown around before. Basically, it just means cash from a specific centralized country such as US or the European Union, etc. So I won't go exactly into how to get started on exchange, but if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask me. So why would anybody own or use Bitcoin? One thing to keep in mind is this is how I see it. I'm from the US. I'm from a country that is very trustworthy. I have no issues with the US dollar. I don't think the US dollar will fail anytime soon. However, I do value my privacy, and probably more so I value my independence. Okay, so I hate interfacing with banks. I hate interfacing with other people. Carrying cash can be stressful, but you can imagine a situation where I walk around in America, go to a restaurant, pay with Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden I say, actually, what, I want to go to Japan, or I want to go to Germany or something like that. And I get there, and I don't have to go to the bank. I don't have to notify my credit card company. I don't have to do anything. I just go into a ramen store in Japan and swipe my Bitcoin wallet, and all of a sudden, I can pay. It really is kind of a wonderful situation where you have a truly international currency, right? Not only that, I think another situation to keep in mind is less stable countries. Zimbabwe, I think, is the prime example of it. So when you're concerned that your economy is going to shit, what do? What happens to the currency? Basically, the price of bread goes from $10 to $100 to $1,000 to what it's called is hyperinflation, and it basically means that the value of the currency is useless. So Zimbabwe is actually an interesting example because they had hyperinflation of their currency. What they ended up doing was changing to the U.S. currency because they knew that everybody knows the value of U.S. currency, right? A dollar is a dollar in America, and in Zimbabwe, it's still a U.S. dollar. So the price of bread can't be $10 million. It has to be $1 or however much it costs in Zimbabwe, probably less. So unfortunately, though, because Zimbabwe has to import U.S. dollars, there's really not enough money to go around in the country. So what is going on is people aren't being paid if they have government jobs. People are there's really not enough actual currency floating around in the government or in the economy. So what people are doing, and actually the price of Bitcoin has skyrocketed in Zimbabwe because, at least on their exchanges, because essentially what it is, it's a way to have economic independence from your central authority, from their government. It's a way for them, if the government comes and seizes all their assets, but they still know their Bitcoin wallet ID, they won't be able to steal their Bitcoin. They won't be able to steal their Bitcoins, So it's a way to kind of protect themselves. And so, although I live in the U.S., and really my the thing that excites me is that I can go from one country to the next and not have to worry about dealing with banks and whatnot. Probably the more useful places in the world are third world countries, places like Zimbabwe, places in South America, places where there's economic unrest, places where there's political unrest, that you can imagine having a currency that does not track with your politics and economy is actually beneficial. So now there's a lot of reasons, for you and I to use Bitcoin, but how does Bitcoin exist, right? And you've probably heard the terms miners. Bitcoin miners control something called nodes, which are really just computers, okay? So they're computers that are connected to the Bitcoin network. If you ever use BitTorrent or LimeWire or Kazaa or Napster, these are all peer-to-peer platforms where your computer is connected to a network, and it's the same way here. So the way that this works is that Bitcoin miners are essentially playing the lottery, right? So I told you that transactions are generated and put onto a block, right? Now, there's a lot of people doing this out there, and there's only one page that needs to get published every 10 minutes, okay? So what ends up happening is that it's random who ends up publishing the page. However, if you have more power, more computers or more powerful computers that are trying to publish a page, it's more likely that you will publish the page. if you happen to publish the page, you are rewarded with a prize of Bitcoins. So this basically provides this incentive to participate. If you are on if you are on the network participating, then you will be making money. So how do you mint new money? Like I said, the U.S. government has, the U.S. mints, the Treasury, which mints new money. But how does it work in Bitcoin? So, like I said, when you publish a new page, if you're so lucky that you end up publishing it, you will receive 12.5 Bitcoins. And you can imagine 12.5 Bitcoins times approximately $10,000. It's a substantial amount of money, right? It ends up being, 120,000 for 4 decimal places. Yeah, 125, over 125,000 US dollars. Okay. So there's a huge reward every 10 minutes. And you don't necessarily have to be the exact one that finds the new block. For example, if you have a very slow computer, or if you have, if you wanted to, what you could do is you could put your computer processing power towards a big pool where you end up sharing the reward if you end up getting a reward. So 12.5 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. However, this amount started at 50 Bitcoins, and then it changed to 25 Bitcoins, and now it's at 12.5 Bitcoins. The way that it works is that every 210,000 blocks, and remember, there's a new block every 10 minutes, so this ends up being 4 years. Every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoins that are rewarded is cut in half. So the next one will be 6.25 Bitcoins. Now, the reason for this will be as follows, but basically the rationale here, and what you'll end up seeing over time is a chart like this. And an important concept to know is that ultimately there will be 21 million Bitcoins in circulation. There will be a time in the future, I think sometime in 2040 or 2050 or something like that, or maybe even 2100. I haven't done the math, but there will be a time where no new Bitcoins will be mined, and then at that point the miners will be paid purely with transaction fees. So this brings up the next point, talking about inflation versus deflation. So the U.S. is in a, really all developed countries have an inflationary currency. And so in 1996, we had $18 billion in U.S. circulation. In 2016, 10 years later, we had $40 billion. So what exactly does this mean? Every year the government prints more money, and although you have more money, the percent share that you have is actually smaller. So you're not more wealthy. Think about a situation where, in the 1920s or whatever, a hamburger costs 15 cents, and nowadays a hamburger costs, $2. So although if we were to look at how much money you have in your bank account now, it's probably much more than you would have had in 1920. You're not actually more wealthy because, it costs money to buy hamburgers. And the price of hamburgers have gone up so much. So Bitcoin, on the other hand, and some virtual currencies, not all, and it's important. This is an important distinction to make between Bitcoin and some other virtual currencies. Bitcoin is only planned to ever have 21 million Bitcoins, after which there will be no new Bitcoins. So it will actually be a deflationary currency. So how much your money is worth today does not actually change based on the future. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that your money has to kind of change in some way, and the way that it ends up changing is from transaction fees, right? So every time you ever make a transaction on the Bitcoin network, it will cost a fee. So every time that you use your money, it is actually technically reducing the amount of money you have. They just work different ways. And inflation, deflation, it's not, there's not one right or one wrong. They're just different ways of working. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is forks. You're going to hear these terms thrown around. And some people make the arguments that forks are actually detrimental, and that forks, are changes in the community and whatnot. But my argument actually is that forks are actually useful. They allow to keep the platform flexible, and I'll kind of describe why. So basically, a fork is taking all of your records, taking a copy of them, and instead of so now you have 2 copies of the record book, and then from this point on, after the fork, you have some of the new records being written in white paper and some of the new records being written on yellow paper. Okay, so as long as everybody says, okay, I care about the white paper transactions, the white paper will win. And as long as everybody cares about the yellow paper transactions, the yellow paper will win. But you can imagine that if people care about both transactions, you actually kind of technically have twice as much spending power all of a sudden, because on the white paper transaction you have 10 Bitcoins, and then on the yellow paper transaction you have 10 Bitcoin cashes, or whatever the new virtual currency is. So essentially you have the ability to spend both of that money, and because they're on different sheets of paper that follow different rules, you have access to both of them. So like I said, it's purely up to the users to determine if they care about a fork or not. And what the fork actually does allow is it allows for a platform to be flexible. So for example, say on our blocks we can put 3 transactions. Now obviously if you only have 1 or 2 people, 3 transactions are more than enough for a block, right? But as the platform scales, as you go from 1 or 2 people to 1 or 2,000, 1 or 2 million people, all of a sudden you imagine a situation where you probably need more than 3 transactions on each 10-minute block. So a fork could be changing from 3 transactions onto a block onto 5 transactions on a block. It's really just a kind of a change in the rules. So as long as everybody agrees that this is a good fork, that the core developers of Bitcoin agree that this is the way that they want to implement this, then a fork is beneficial because it allows you to change the rules in a way that will be useful, right? You can imagine a situation where somebody would create a fork where the changes would be detrimental and nobody would use it. All right, so that was maybe a little bit longer than I wanted, but there's a lot to unpack, and it, it's a really complex topic, and especially when people are asking, is this the time that I want to invest in Bitcoin now that it's going through explosive growth? That's a question that you have to ask yourself what kind of risk that you want to partake in order to achieve what kind of gains you want to partake in. You can like I said, Bitcoin is a deflationary currency, right? So you can imagine a situation where Bitcoin is internationally adopted, in theory. If you owned 1 Bitcoin, then you would own 1/21 millionth of the global economy, which is a very intriguing, interesting, high, low risk, high reward investment. That said, I'm not saying that you should or should not, because obviously there are reasons why Bitcoin is flawed. I think we are really not used to deflationary currencies, and it's another thing to keep in mind. Every transaction there is a fee, meaning that small transactions less than the smallest fee don't really make sense at all to do. So just things to consider. So yeah, leave a comment below. What do you think about Bitcoin? What do you think about centralized versus decentralized currency? Do you find that it would be useful for you? And what do you think about inflationary versus deflationary economics, and how you feel kind of your money growing over time but being less valuable versus you just kind of losing your money over time psychologically will impact you. Yeah, feel free to subscribe and yeah, just ask any questions. Thank you.